The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage crumbled in 88 words. My mother-in-law had been secretly transferring our joint assets to her personal accounts for 8 months, believing she had found the perfect loophole to force me into submission. What Margaret Blackwood did not realize was that my prenup contained a clause she had never seen one that would make her manipulation backfire spectacularly. The woman who spent 2 years calling me an unworthy gold digger was about to learn that some games have consequences she never imagined possible. Hey, beautiful souls, watching from around the world. Before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama that changed everything, I believed about trust and blood loyalty. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. I love connecting with you all. If stories about standing up to family manipulation and unexpected justice served cold speak to your soul, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this mother-in-law revenge tale has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you will want to see how this prenup clause becomes the ultimate weapon against family control. My name is Serafina Ashworth, and I should have seen the red flags from the moment I said yes to David Blackwood 3 years ago. His mother Margaret made it abundantly clear that no woman would ever be good enough for her precious only son, especially not someone from my modest background. David came from old money, the kind where family portraits hung in gilded frames and trust funds were discussed over afternoon tea. I came from a single-parent household where my mom worked double shifts to keep us afloat. The prenup negotiations were brutal. Margaret insisted on being present for every meeting with our attorneys, treating me like I was some kind of criminal trying to steal the family fortune. She demanded clauses that would limit my access to David's assets, restrict my ability to make financial decisions, and even included provisions about how our potential children would be raised. I remember sitting in that mahogany-paneled conference room watching her dictate terms while David remained silent, and feeling like I was signing away my dignity along with my rights. What Margaret did not know was that my own attorney had insisted on a reciprocal transparency clause. If either party attempted to manipulate or hide assets during the marriage, the prenup would become null and void, and the injured party would be entitled to full disclosure of all financial activities. It seemed like standard legal protection at the time, something that would never actually be needed. How naive I was. The first year of marriage was a constant battle for control. Margaret would show up unannounced to rearrange our furniture, criticize my cooking, and make snide comments about my career as a graphic designer. She treated David's income as family money that required her approval for major purchases. When I wanted to renovate our kitchen, she vetoed it. When I suggested we take a vacation without her input, she guilt-tripped David into canceling. Every decision became a family committee vote where I was consistently outnumbered. The financial control was more subtle, but equally invasive. Margaret had convinced David to add her name to several of our joint accounts for emergency purposes. She monitored our spending through online banking access and would call David immediately if she disapproved of any purchase over $500. I felt like a child asking permission to spend my own husband's money, even though I contributed to our household expenses from my freelance work. The breaking point came when I discovered I was pregnant. Instead of celebration, Margaret immediately began making plans for her grandchild. She wanted to choose the pediatrician, the daycare, even the baby's name. She informed us that she would be moving into our guest room for the first 6 months after the birth to help properly raise the baby. When I objected, she reminded David that the prenup gave her significant influence over child-rearing decisions. That night, I called my attorney, Sarah Martinez, in tears. I explained how suffocated I felt, how every aspect of my marriage was being controlled by my mother-in-law, and how I was considering divorce just to escape the constant manipulation. Sarah listened carefully, then asked a question that changed everything. Serafina, have you been monitoring your joint accounts lately? The transparency clause works both ways. The next morning, I logged into our online banking for the first time in months. Margaret had been so controlling about finances that I had stopped checking our accounts, assuming David was handling everything responsibly. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past 8 months, there had been systematic transfers from our joint savings account to an account I did not recognize. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there, but gradually increasing to transfers of several $1,000s at a time. The account receiving these transfers was registered under Margaret's name. She had been slowly draining our savings while simultaneously lecturing me about fiscal responsibility and the importance of building wealth for the family's future. The total amount she had stolen exceeded $40,000 money we had been saving for a down payment on a larger house before the baby arrived. I printed every bank statement, every transfer record, every piece of evidence of her theft. The pattern was clear. Margaret had been using her access to our joint accounts to gradually move our money into her personal control. She was not just manipulating our marriage emotionally, she was committing actual financial crimes. When I confronted David with the evidence that evening, his reaction was everything I had feared. Instead of outrage at his mother's betrayal, he became defensive. "She was probably just moving money around for investment purposes," he said weakly. "Mom has always been good with financial planning. Maybe she was trying to help us get better returns." I stared at my husband in disbelief. "David, this is theft. She has been stealing from us for months. How is that helping us?" He looked uncomfortable but continued making excuses. "The money is still in the family. It is not like she spent it on herself. Maybe we should talk to her before jumping to conclusions." That night, lying in bed next to my husband, who seemed more concerned about protecting his mother than supporting his pregnant wife, I realized that Margaret's manipulation had been even more successful than I had imagined. She had not just stolen our money, she had stolen David's ability to see her actions clearly. The next day brought the certified letter that would change everything. Inside was a formal notice from Margaret's attorney informing us that due to financial irresponsibility and failure to properly manage marital assets, she was exercising her rights under the prenup to assume direct control over our family finances. She was not asking for permission, she was taking control. But Margaret had made a crucial mistake. The letter included detailed financial statements showing exactly where our money had been moved and how she planned to manage our assets going forward. In trying to legitimize her theft through legal channels, she had provided me with the smoking gun I needed. I called Sarah immediately. "The transparency clause has been triggered," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "And I have everything I need to prove it." Sarah Martinez had been practicing family law for 15 years, and I could hear the excitement in her voice as she reviewed the evidence I had compiled. "Serafina, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of financial manipulation I have ever seen. Margaret did not just violate the prenup, she handed us the keys to unraveling everything." The transparency clause that had seemed like boring legal language during our prenup negotiations was about to become my weapon of choice. According to the terms David and I had signed, any attempt to conceal or manipulate marital assets would trigger full financial disclosure requirements. Margaret's systematic theft and her attorney's letter demanding financial control had activated every protection my lawyer had built into our agreement. "Here's what we're going to do," Sarah explained during our emergency meeting. "We're going to demand complete financial records from Margaret under the transparency clause. Bank statements, investment accounts, property records, trust fund documentation, everything. If she wants to claim authority over your family's finances, she needs to prove she has clean hands." The formal request went out the following Monday. Margaret's attorney received a 20-page legal document demanding full financial disclosure, including detailed explanations for every transfer from our joint accounts. We also requested documentation of Margaret's authority to make these transfers and legal justification for her claimed oversight of our marital finances. Margaret's response came within 48 hours, and it was not what I expected. Instead of providing the requested documentation, her attorney sent an aggressive letter claiming that my demands were frivolous harassment designed to undermine family unity. They threatened counter-litigation if I continued pursuing baseless accusations against a respected member of the community. That letter was Margaret's second crucial mistake. By refusing to comply with the transparency clause requirements, she had violated the prenup even more egregiously. Sarah filed an emergency motion with the court requesting immediate asset freezing and appointment of an independent financial monitor. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. David was furious when I told him about the legal proceedings, accusing me of destroying the family and attacking his mother out of spite. His loyalty to Margaret remained unshakable even as the evidence of her theft mounted. "You're being manipulated, Serafina," he said coldly. "My mother has always put family first. She was protecting our money from your reckless spending habits." I almost laughed at the irony. "David, I have not made a significant purchase without her permission in 2 years. What reckless spending are you talking about?" He could not answer that question, but it did not matter. Margaret had spent years conditioning him to see her control as protection and my independence as a threat. Breaking that psychological hold would require more than bank statements and legal documents. The night before our court hearing, I received an unexpected visitor. David's aunt, Patricia, Margaret's younger sister, appeared at my door looking nervous and conflicted. We had always had a cordial relationship, though Margaret discouraged close contact between Patricia and our family. "I need to tell you something," Patricia said as I invited her inside. "About Margaret and what she has been doing with family money for years." What Patricia revealed over the next 2 hours changed everything I thought I understood about my mother-in-law. Margaret had not just been stealing from David and me, she had been systematically manipulating family finances for decades. She had embezzled money from her elderly mother's estate, diverted funds from family trust accounts, and used her position as executor of several family wills to redirect inheritance money into her personal control. "She's been doing this since David's father died 10 years ago," Patricia explained. "She convinced everyone that she needed to consolidate family assets for better management, but she's been using that money to fund her lifestyle and maintain control over the family. I tried to speak up years ago, but she threatened to cut me off from the family trust if I caused problems." Patricia had documentation copies of trust account statements, emails discussing asset management strategies, and records showing how Margaret had redirected inheritance money that should have gone to other family members. The pattern was consistent. Margaret used her position of trust to steal from family members while presenting herself as the responsible financial guardian. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Patricia looked tired. "Because I'm dying, Serafina. Lung cancer. I do not want to take this secret to my grave, and I cannot watch her destroy your marriage the way she destroyed so many other family relationships. Margaret has been playing these games for years, and it is time someone stopped her." Armed with Patricia's documentation and testimony, Sarah and I walked into court Friday morning with a case that went far beyond simple prenup violations. We were exposing a decades-long pattern of financial abuse that had affected multiple family members. The judge, Honorable Catherine Webb, reviewed our evidence with obvious concern. Margaret's attorney tried to dismiss Patricia's testimony as family gossip and unsubstantiated allegations, but the documentation was too extensive and detailed to ignore. Mrs. Blackwood, Judge Webb, addressed Margaret directly. "These allegations are extremely serious. Financial elder abuse, trust fund manipulation, and systematic embezzlement are criminal matters. I am ordering immediate asset freezing on all accounts in question and appointment of an independent forensic accountant to review your financial activities over the past 10 years. Margaret's composure finally cracked. "Your Honor, this is a family matter. These accusations come from a vindictive daughter-in-law who wants to steal my son's inheritance. I have devoted my life to protecting this family's financial security." Judge Webb was not impressed. "Mrs. Blackwood, protection does not involve moving other people's money into your personal accounts without authorization. The evidence suggests a pattern of financial manipulation that extends far beyond any prenup dispute." The court ordered Margaret to return all funds taken from our joint accounts within 30 days and to provide complete financial records for forensic review. She was also prohibited from accessing any family trust accounts or making financial decisions on behalf of other family members pending the investigation. As we left the courthouse, Margaret cornered me in the parking lot. Her mask of composed superiority had completely fallen away, revealing the desperate manipulator underneath. "You have no idea what you have started," she hissed. "David will never forgive you for this. You are destroying everything I built for this family." I looked at this woman who had spent years trying to control every aspect of my life, and I felt something I had never experienced before: complete freedom from her power over me. "Margaret," I said calmly, "you destroyed this family years ago. I am just making sure everyone else can see what you really are." The forensic accounting investigation unleashed a flood of family secrets that Margaret had kept buried for decades. Within 2 weeks of Judge Webb's order, forensic accountant Michael Torres had uncovered financial irregularities dating back 12 years involving multiple family members and several estate accounts. The most shocking discovery involved David's late father's life insurance policy. Margaret had told the family that Robert Blackwood's policy had been significantly smaller than expected due to premium payment issues. In reality, the policy had paid out the full amount of $800,000 directly to Margaret as beneficiary. She had used those funds to purchase investment properties in her name alone while telling family members that Robert had left minimal assets. Patricia's cancer diagnosis had given her a courage she had never possessed before. She began reaching out to other family members who had been victimized by Margaret's financial manipulation, creating a network of relatives who had previously suffered in silence. David's cousin Marcus was the first to respond to Patricia's outreach. Margaret had served as executor for his grandfather's estate 5 years earlier, and the inheritance Marcus received had been substantially less than what his grandfather's will had specified. Marcus had questioned the discrepancy at the time, but had been told by Margaret that estate taxes and legal fees had consumed most of the assets. "I should have pushed harder for answers," Marcus told me during a family meeting Patricia organized at her house. "But Margaret always made me feel like questioning her was disrespectful to Grandpa's memory. She had this way of making you feel guilty for wanting transparency." The pattern was consistent across multiple family members. Margaret would volunteer to serve as executor or financial guardian during family crises, then use her position of trust to redirect assets while presenting herself as the responsible family member handling difficult situations. Anyone who questioned her methods was accused of being greedy or disrespectful. David's younger sister Emma had been another victim. When Emma had gone through a difficult divorce 3 years earlier, Margaret had offered to help manage Emma's finances until things stabilized. Emma had gratefully accepted allowing Margaret to handle her child support payments and manage her savings account. It was only during our family meetings that Emma learned Margaret had been collecting interest on investment accounts that should have been Emma's, and had used Emma's savings as collateral for Margaret's own business loans. "I trusted her completely," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "She was helping me when I was at my lowest point. I never imagined she was taking advantage of my vulnerability." The family meetings Patricia organized became our war room for building a case against Margaret's financial abuse. Each family member brought documentation of their interactions with Margaret, and together we began to see the full scope of her manipulation. She had not just been stealing money, she had been systematically destroying family relationships by creating financial dependency and then exploiting that vulnerability. Sarah Martinez worked with each family member to document their losses and coordinate our legal strategy. The prenup violation that had started this investigation was becoming the foundation for a much larger case involving multiple victims and potentially criminal charges. But Margaret was not passive during this period. She launched her own counterattack designed to isolate me from the family and discredit our evidence. She began spreading rumors that I was mentally unstable due to pregnancy hormones and that I was manipulating vulnerable family members to support my delusional conspiracy theories. More damaging was her campaign to turn David against me completely. Margaret convinced David that my legal actions were motivated by greed rather than justice, and that I was using his family's private financial matters to embarrass them publicly. She painted herself as the victim of a vindictive daughter-in-law who was destroying family unity out of spite. David's loyalty to his mother remained unshakable despite mounting evidence of her crimes. He began staying at Margaret's house several nights per week, claiming that my obsession with attacking his family was making our home environment toxic. When I tried to show him the evidence we had compiled, he refused to look at the documents. "I know my mother," he said stubbornly. "She has devoted her entire life to protecting this family. I will not let you turn me against her based on your misinterpretation of financial records." The emotional toll of fighting both Margaret's financial crimes and my husband's willful blindness was overwhelming. I was 6 months pregnant, dealing with the stress of legal proceedings and watching my marriage disintegrate because David could not accept the truth about his mother's manipulation. Emma became my closest ally during this period. Her own experience of being victimized by Margaret had opened her eyes to the tactics their mother had been using for years. "She did the same thing to David that she did to all of us," Emma explained. "She created a crisis, positioned herself as the solution, and then made him dependent on her approval. The difference is that David never had a reason to question her control." Emma helped me understand Margaret's psychological methods in ways that purely legal evidence could not reveal. Margaret was not just a thief, she was a master manipulator who used emotional leverage to maintain control over her victims. She had spent years training David to see her control as love and protection, making it nearly impossible for him to recognize her abuse. The breakthrough in building our alliance came when Patricia convinced Margaret's eldest brother, Uncle Harrison, to review his own financial records. Harrison was a retired banker who had always prided himself on his financial acumen, but he had allowed Margaret to manage certain family trust distributions because of her expertise in estate planning. Harrison's review revealed that Margaret had been systematically overcharging administrative fees for trust management and pocketing the excess. Over 8 years, she had stolen nearly $120,000 from trust accounts that were supposed to benefit multiple family members. "I taught Margaret everything she knows about banking and trust management," Harrison told our family gathering with obvious shame. "I never imagined she would use that knowledge to steal from her own family. This is my fault for not monitoring her more carefully." Harrison's involvement transformed our informal family alliance into a serious legal coalition. His banking background and professional credibility gave weight to our accusations that Margaret could not easily dismiss as family drama. He also had connections within the banking industry who could help trace Margaret's financial activities across multiple institutions. As our evidence mounted and our family alliance strengthened, Margaret's behavior became increasingly desperate. She began making threats through her attorney, claiming that family members were conspiring to steal her rightful inheritance, and demanding that the court dismiss all charges as part of a coordinated harassment campaign. Margaret also escalated her emotional manipulation of David. She convinced him that the stress of our legal battle was affecting her health, and that I was essentially trying to kill his mother through targeted harassment. David came home one night and demanded that I drop all legal proceedings immediately. "Choose Serafina," he said coldly. "Drop this vendetta against my mother, or our marriage is over." I looked at my husband, this man I had loved enough to marry despite his family's hostility, and realized that Margaret had already won the battle for his soul. She had trained him so thoroughly to prioritize her needs over everyone else's that he could not see her crimes even when presented with overwhelming evidence. "David," I said quietly, "I cannot choose between seeking justice and saving our marriage. The fact that you are asking me to make that choice shows how completely your mother has manipulated both of us." That night, David moved out of our house, permanently choosing his mother's comfort over his pregnant wife's need for support. It was the moment I realized that some family loyalty runs so deep that truth cannot penetrate it, and that sometimes the people we love most are the least capable of seeing us clearly. But I was no longer alone in this fight. Patricia, Emma, Marcus Harrison, and several other family members had formed a coalition united by shared experience of Margaret's abuse. We were not just seeking financial restitution, we were working to expose a pattern of family manipulation that had damaged multiple lives over many years. The war was far from over, but for the first time since discovering Margaret's theft, I felt like we had the allies and evidence needed to win. The betrayal came from the person I trusted most. 3 weeks into our coordinated legal battle against Margaret, Emma called me with devastating news that would temporarily destroy everything we had built. "Serafina, I need to tell you something." Emma's voice was shaking as we met at a coffee shop downtown. "Margaret knows about our family meetings. She knows about all the evidence we have been collecting, and she knows exactly who has been talking to the forensic accountant." My blood ran cold. Our family alliance had been operating under strict confidentiality, sharing sensitive financial documents and coordinating testimony through secure channels. The only way Margaret could have detailed knowledge of our activities was if someone within our group was feeding her information. How could she possibly know those details? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Emma looked like she was about to be sick. "Because I told her everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. Emma, who had shared her own story of being victimized by Margaret's financial manipulation, who had helped me understand Margaret's psychological tactics, who had become my closest ally in this fight, had been working with Margaret all along. "I do not understand," I said weakly. "You showed us your financial records. You talked about how Margaret stole from you during your divorce. Why would you help her?" Emma's explanation revealed a level of manipulation I had not thought possible. Margaret had approached Emma 3 days after our first family meeting, not with threats or anger, but with a carefully crafted story designed to exploit Emma's deepest insecurities. "She told me that you were using my divorce trauma to manipulate me into supporting false accusations against her," Emma said, unable to meet my eyes. "She said you were taking advantage of my emotional vulnerability the same way my ex-husband had, and that you were going to destroy the family and then leave David anyway." Margaret had not stopped there. She had offered Emma something I could never provide: complete financial security. Margaret promised to forgive Emma's supposed debts to family accounts and to establish a trust fund for Emma's children's education, but only if Emma helped monitor our legal activities and report back on our strategy. "She made it sound like she was protecting the family from you," Emma continued. "She said the money issues were all misunderstandings that could be resolved quietly if you stopped pursuing legal action. She convinced me that helping her was the only way to prevent you from destroying David and splitting up the family permanently." The scope of Emma's betrayal was comprehensive and devastating. She had provided Margaret with copies of all the financial documents we had compiled, detailed summaries of our family meetings, and advance warning about every piece of evidence we planned to present to the court. Margaret had been staying 3 steps ahead of our legal strategy because she knew exactly what we were planning. Worse, Emma had helped Margaret discredit our other family allies by feeding her personal information that could be used for targeted manipulation. Margaret now knew about Marcus's recent job troubles, Patricia's cancer treatment costs, and Harrison's concerns about his own retirement finances, all ammunition that could be used to pressure them into withdrawing their support. "Margaret has already started reaching out to Patricia and Marcus," Emma admitted. "She is offering them financial assistance with their current problems in exchange for recanting their testimony about her financial management. She told Patricia she would help cover cancer treatment costs if Patricia stopped cooperating with the investigation." The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Margaret had identified each family member's greatest vulnerability and crafted individual approaches designed to exploit their specific needs and fears. She was not just fighting our legal case, she was systematically dismantling our coalition by offering each person something they desperately needed. Emma's betrayal had given Margaret the intelligence she needed to launch a coordinated counterattack against our entire family alliance. Within 48 hours of our coffee shop meeting, I received calls from Patricia and Marcus informing me that they were withdrawing from the legal proceedings. Patricia's call was heartbreaking. Serafina, I believe Margaret committed the crimes we documented, but I cannot afford to fight her anymore. My cancer treatment is going to cost more than my insurance covers, and Margaret has offered to help with the medical bills. I am sorry, but I need to think about my survival first. Marcus was more direct. Margaret's attorney contacted my employer about the family legal disputes. They are concerned that ongoing litigation might affect my security clearance at work. I cannot risk my job over family financial issues that happened years ago. I need to withdraw my testimony and focus on protecting my career. Harrison's withdrawal was the most devastating because it eliminated our most credible witness. Margaret had discovered that Harrison's own retirement investments had performed poorly over the past 2 years, leaving him financially vulnerable despite his banking background. She offered to help him recover his losses through family investment opportunities, but only if he stopped supporting our accusations against her financial management. I am sorry, Serafina, Harrison told me during a tense phone call, but I cannot afford to be wrong about Margaret's intentions. If there is any chance that these are misunderstandings rather than deliberate crimes, I need to give her the benefit of the doubt. My own financial situation is too precarious to risk burning bridges with family members. Within 1 week, our powerful family alliance had been reduced to just myself and Sarah Martinez. Every other family member who had provided evidence or testimony had been neutralized through a combination of financial incentives and targeted pressure. Margaret had effectively bought their silence while simultaneously discrediting our case by making it appear that family members were abandoning our accusations once they learned the full truth. The legal implications were severe. Without family testimony to support our claims, our case relied primarily on financial records that Margaret's attorneys could potentially explain away as legitimate asset management activities. Emma's betrayal had not just cost us allies. It had provided Margaret with detailed knowledge of our legal strategy that she could use to prepare counter-arguments for every piece of evidence we planned to present. David's reaction to the family alliance's collapse was predictably smug. "I told you this would happen," he said during one of our few conversations. "You convinced vulnerable family members to support false accusations against my mother, and now they are realizing they were manipulated into betraying someone who has always helped them." The irony was crushing. Margaret had manipulated family members into withdrawing support by offering them exactly what she had stolen from them in the first place: financial assistance during times of need. She was using their own money to buy their silence about her theft, and they were too desperate to refuse. Emma's final betrayal came in the form of an affidavit she submitted to the court, recanting all of her previous testimony and claiming that I had pressured and manipulated her into making false accusations against Margaret. The affidavit described our family meetings as conspiracy sessions, where I had coached family members to misinterpret legitimate financial activities as theft. Margaret Blackwood has always acted in the best interests of our family, Emma's affidavit stated. Any appearance of improper financial management resulted from miscommunication and incomplete information rather than deliberate wrongdoing. I deeply regret allowing myself to be manipulated into supporting accusations that have caused unnecessary pain and division within our family. Reading Emma's affidavit felt like being stabbed by someone I had trusted completely. She had not just withdrawn her support, she had actively turned our legal strategy into evidence of my supposed manipulation and vindictiveness. That night, alone in my house while 8 months pregnant, I faced the possibility that Margaret had won completely. Our family alliance was destroyed, our evidence was compromised, and even my own husband believed I was the villain in this story. Margaret had successfully positioned herself as the victim of a vindictive daughter-in-law's harassment campaign, while simultaneously covering up years of financial crimes against multiple family members. But I had underestimated the power of truth to find its own path to light, and I had not yet met the ally who would change everything. The phone call that changed everything came from a voice I did not recognize. It was 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night, and I was struggling with pregnancy insomnia when an elderly man introduced himself as Thomas Whitmore, former estate attorney for the Blackwood family. "Mrs. Blackwood, I hope you will forgive the late hour, but I have been following the legal proceedings involving your mother-in-law through court filings, and I believe I have information that might be relevant to your case." Thomas explained that he had served as the family's estate attorney for over 20 years before retiring 5 years earlier. During his tenure, he had handled multiple estate settlements and trust administrations for various Blackwood family members, always under Margaret's close supervision as the designated family financial coordinator. "I retired because I became uncomfortable with certain requests Margaret was making regarding estate distributions and trust fund management," Thomas said carefully. "At the time, I attributed my concerns to generational differences in financial management philosophy. However, recent court documents suggest that my concerns may have been more justified than I realized." What Thomas revealed during our meeting the following day provided the missing pieces of evidence that Emma's betrayal had cost us. As the family's estate attorney, Thomas had maintained detailed records of every financial transaction he had overseen, including documentation of discrepancies between Margaret's reported distributions and actual estate values. "I kept copies of everything," Thomas explained as he opened several file boxes in his home office. "Margaret always insisted on handling estate communications with beneficiaries directly, claiming it was more personal and appropriate for family matters. I was responsible only for the legal mechanics of asset transfer. However, I maintained parallel records for my own protection." Thomas's files contained smoking gun evidence that Margaret's crimes extended far beyond what our family alliance had discovered. The most damning documents involved David's grandfather's estate from 8 years earlier. Margaret had reported to family members that the estate was valued at approximately $400,000 after taxes and legal fees. Thomas's records showed the actual estate value was over $1.2 million. Margaret convinced the family that estate taxes and legal complications had consumed most of the assets, Thomas explained. She handled all communication with beneficiaries and distributed payments that were consistent with her reported valuations. The difference between actual and reported values was transferred into accounts that Margaret controlled as executor. The pattern repeated across multiple estates and trust funds. Margaret had systematically underreported asset values to beneficiaries while redirecting the difference into her personal control. She had stolen over $800,000 from family inheritances over the course of 8 years, using her position as family financial coordinator to mask the theft. Thomas had maintained his silence for years because questioning Margaret would have meant accusing a long-standing client of felony embezzlement without absolute proof. Margaret was extremely careful to ensure that all transfers were technically legal, he said. She had proper documentation for her actions as executor and trustee. Proving criminal intent rather than poor judgment would have been difficult without access to her personal financial records. But Thomas had kept detailed notes of his concerns, including Margaret's unusual insistence on handling beneficiary communications personally and her resistance to providing detailed accounting reports to family members. His professional documentation provided the context needed to prove that Margaret's financial management was deliberately deceptive rather than simply incompetent. The final straw for me was when Margaret requested that I prepare estate documents that would give her increased authority over future inheritances, Thomas said. She wanted language that would allow her to delay distributions to beneficiaries she deemed financially irresponsible and to redirect inheritance money into family investment accounts under her control. I refused to draft those documents and recommended she seek different counsel. Thomas's evidence was devastating to Margaret's defense because it came from a completely independent source with impeccable professional credentials. Unlike family testimony that could be dismissed as personal disputes, Thomas's records represented objective legal documentation of Margaret's systematic theft over nearly a decade. Sarah Martinez reviewed Thomas's files with obvious excitement. "This changes everything," she said during our emergency meeting. "Thomas's records provide the missing context that proves intent to deceive." Margaret was not just moving money around for family benefit, she was deliberately hiding asset values from rightful beneficiaries. The forensic accountant, Michael Torres, was able to cross-reference Thomas's estate records with Margaret's personal financial statements, revealing exactly where the stolen inheritance money had gone. Margaret had used the funds to purchase real estate, invest in business ventures, and maintain a lifestyle that her legitimate income could not support. The timeline is perfect, Michael explained. Every major asset purchase or investment Margaret made corresponds directly to periods when she was administering family estates or managing trust distributions. She was essentially using family inheritance money as her personal investment capital. But Thomas brought more than just evidence to our case. As a respected attorney with decades of experience in estate law, his professional reputation gave credibility to our accusations that Margaret's betrayal campaign could not undermine. Unlike family members who could be pressured or bought off, Thomas had no financial vulnerability that Margaret could exploit. More importantly, Thomas introduced us to a network of professional colleagues who had experienced similar concerns about Margaret's financial management practices. Other attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors who had worked with the Blackwood family over the years had noticed irregularities, but had remained silent due to client confidentiality requirements. Once I decided to come forward, I reached out to several colleagues who had worked with Margaret on family financial matters, Thomas explained. They were relieved to learn that someone else had documented concerns about her practices. Margaret has been using professional courtesy and client confidentiality to shield her activities from scrutiny. The professional network Thomas assembled provided corroborating evidence that Margaret's financial management problems extended beyond just family relationships. Bank officers had noted unusual transfer patterns. Investment advisors had questioned aggressive asset consolidation strategies, and insurance agents had raised concerns about beneficiary designation changes that seemed to disproportionately benefit Margaret. Margaret has been operating at the intersection of family trust and professional relationships, Thomas said. Family members assumed professionals were monitoring her activities, while professionals assumed family members were providing oversight. She exploited the gap between personal and professional accountability. Thomas's involvement also neutralized the impact of Emma's betrayal by providing alternative evidence that did not rely on family testimony. Even if every family member recants their previous statements, we now have professional documentation of Margaret's systematic theft, Sarah explained. Thomas's records stand on their own merit. The psychological impact of Thomas's support was as important as the legal evidence he provided. After watching our family alliance crumble under Margaret's manipulation, I had begun to doubt whether anyone could resist her pressure. Thomas represented proof that people with integrity would eventually choose truth over convenience, even when it required personal risk. I should have spoken up years ago, Thomas told me. My silence enabled Margaret to continue victimizing family members who trusted her. I cannot undo that damage, but I can ensure that her crimes are finally exposed and that she faces appropriate consequences. With Thomas's evidence and professional network supporting our case, Sarah filed updated legal documents that transformed our prenup violation dispute into a comprehensive criminal referral. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation into Margaret's estate management practices, while the court expanded asset freezing orders to cover all accounts linked to suspicious transfers. Margaret's response to Thomas's involvement revealed the desperation underlying her previous confidence. Her attorney filed emergency motions claiming that Thomas was violating attorney-client privilege and that his records were inadmissible due to confidentiality requirements. The motions were frivolous and quickly dismissed, but they showed that Margaret finally understood she was facing evidence she could not manipulate or discredit. David's reaction to the professional evidence against his mother was the first crack in his absolute loyalty. "These are serious accusations from credible sources," he admitted during a tense conversation. "But there has to be an explanation. Maybe Mom made mistakes, but she would never deliberately steal from family." For the first time since this battle began, David seemed to be questioning his assumptions about Margaret's integrity. The shift was subtle but significant. He was no longer automatically dismissing evidence against his mother, even if he was not yet ready to accept the truth about her crimes. Thomas's emergence as our ally had transformed a failing legal case into an overwhelming demonstration of systematic financial abuse, spanning multiple years and numerous victims. Margaret's manipulation tactics that had successfully neutralized family members were powerless against professional documentation and independent witnesses. The tide had finally turned in our favor, but Margaret still had one final card to play. The end came swiftly once the district attorney's office took control of the investigation. Within 2 weeks of Thomas's evidence being submitted, Margaret Blackwood was arrested at her home on charges of felony embezzlement, elder abuse, and wire fraud. The woman who had spent years positioning herself as the responsible guardian of family finances was led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured her fall from grace. The criminal investigation uncovered crimes that exceeded even Thomas's comprehensive documentation. Digital forensics experts found deleted emails between Margaret and various financial institutions, revealing a sophisticated scheme to manipulate estate valuations and hide assets from rightful beneficiaries. Margaret had been operating essentially as a one-woman organized crime operation, using family trust and professional relationships to steal nearly $1.4 million over the course of 10 years. The most shocking revelation came from Margaret's personal computer files. Investigators discovered detailed spreadsheets where Margaret had tracked her thefts by victim, noting which family members were most vulnerable to manipulation and which crimes were least likely to be discovered. She had maintained these records like a business ledger, treating the systematic betrayal of her own family as a professional enterprise. Margaret Blackwood treated her family like a personal bank, prosecutor Janet Morrison announced at the press conference following Margaret's arraignment. She exploited every position of trust as executor, as trustee, as mother and mother-in-law to steal money from people who loved and trusted her completely. David's reaction to his mother's arrest was devastating to witness. The man who had defended Margaret against all evidence finally could not deny the overwhelming proof of her crimes. He appeared at our house the night of her arrest, looking broken and confused, like someone awakening from a decades-long dream. "I do not understand how I missed all of this," he said, sitting in our kitchen while I made tea with shaking hands. "She was my mother. I thought I knew her better than anyone. How could I have been so blind to what she was doing?" Watching David confront the truth about Margaret's manipulation was painful because I could see how completely she had conditioned him to prioritize her needs over his own judgment. She had not just stolen money, she had stolen his ability to think critically about her behavior, creating a psychological dependency that had persisted well into his adulthood. "She trained you from childhood to see her control as love," I said gently. "That kind of psychological conditioning is incredibly difficult to recognize from the inside. She used your loyalty and trust against you, just like she did with everyone else." David looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I chose her over you. I chose protecting someone who was committing crimes over supporting my pregnant wife. How do I even begin to make up for that?" The question of forgiveness was complicated because Margaret's manipulation had infected every aspect of our marriage. David had not consciously chosen to enable his mother's crimes, but his inability to question her authority had made him complicit in her abuse. Rebuilding trust would require him to fundamentally change how he approached family relationships and personal boundaries. "I need to see a therapist," David said. "Someone who understands family manipulation and psychological abuse. I need to understand how she controlled me so completely, and I need to make sure I never enable someone to abuse you or our child the way I enabled her to abuse our entire family." David's commitment to therapy and genuine accountability gave me hope that our marriage might survive Margaret's destruction. But I also knew that healing would take years of hard work, and that some damage might be permanent. Trust once broken by betrayal and manipulation does not rebuild easily. The legal consequences for Margaret were severe. She ultimately pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy trial that would have exposed even more family secrets. Judge Webb sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison and ordered complete financial restitution to all victims. Margaret was also required to surrender her house and all assets purchased with stolen funds. "Mrs. Blackwood, you betrayed the trust of every person who loved you," Judge Webb said during sentencing. "You turned family relationships into criminal enterprises and treated your own relatives as victims to be exploited. The damage you have caused extends far beyond financial losses. You have destroyed family bonds that may never be repaired." Margaret's final statement before sentencing was unrepentant and revealing. "I devoted my entire life to protecting this family's financial security," she said coldly. "Everything I did was intended to preserve wealth for future generations. If family members were too irresponsible to handle money properly, someone had to make difficult decisions on their behalf." Even facing prison, Margaret continued to frame her crimes as noble sacrifices rather than selfish theft. She had convinced herself that stealing from family members was actually protecting them, demonstrating the depth of her psychological manipulation and narcissistic worldview. The financial restitution process revealed the full extent of Margaret's impact on family members' lives. Patricia's cancer treatment costs had been delayed because Margaret had stolen money Patricia needed for medical care. Marcus had been forced to take predatory loans for his children's education because his grandfather's inheritance had been diverted to Margaret's accounts. Emma's financial struggles during her divorce had been exacerbated by Margaret's theft of funds that should have supported her transition to independence. "Margaret stole more than money," Patricia said during her victim impact statement. "She stole opportunities, security, and peace of mind from people who trusted her completely. I will never fully recover from the stress and anxiety her crimes caused during my cancer treatment." The family healing process was complicated because Margaret's manipulation had pitted relatives against each other for years. She had created artificial scarcity by stealing inheritance money, then used that scarcity to generate competition and resentment among family members who should have been supporting each other. Emma's decision to betray our legal case had been motivated partly by genuine financial desperation. Desperation that existed because Margaret had previously stolen money that would have provided Emma with stability. Understanding this context helped me forgive Emma's betrayal, while still holding her accountable for her choices. "I am sorry for undermining your case against Margaret," Emma said during a family meeting several months after the sentencing. "I was scared and desperate, and I let her manipulate me into believing that protecting her was the same as protecting the family. I should have been stronger." Emma's apology was part of a broader family reconciliation process facilitated by therapy and honest conversation about Margaret's impact on family dynamics. We were all learning to distinguish between legitimate family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior, between supporting loved ones and allowing manipulation. Thomas Whitmore became an unexpected source of wisdom during this healing process. His professional experience with family financial abuse helped us understand that Margaret's behavior was not unique, that many families struggle with similar dynamics of trust manipulation and financial control. Recovery from family financial abuse requires rebuilding trust slowly and with appropriate safeguards, Thomas explained. Family members need to learn healthy boundaries around money and decision-making authority. The goal is not to become suspicious of everyone, but to recognize warning signs of manipulation. My daughter was born 3 months after Margaret's sentencing, during a period when our family was learning to function without Margaret's controlling presence. I named her Hope Seraphina Blackwood, symbolizing both my determination to create a better future and my commitment to maintaining family connections that honored truth rather than enabling abuse. David proved his commitment to change by attending therapy consistently and actively, working to understand how Margaret's manipulation had affected his judgment. He also took concrete steps to protect our family from future financial abuse, including establishing transparent financial management practices and refusing to give any family member unilateral control over our assets. "I want Hope to grow up in a family where love does not require blind loyalty," David said while holding our newborn daughter. "I want her to know that questioning authority is healthy, and that protecting someone you love sometimes means holding them accountable for their actions. The criminal restitution process eventually recovered most of the money Margaret had stolen, though some assets had been lost through poor investments or transferred beyond recovery. More importantly, the legal proceedings established a clear record of Margaret's crimes that prevented her from manipulating family narratives or claiming victimhood. Patricia's cancer went into remission, and the recovered inheritance money allowed her to access better treatment options without financial stress. Marcus was able to pay off predatory loans and establish college funds for his children. Harrison recovered his retirement losses and rebuilt his financial security. The material recovery was significant, but the psychological healing took much longer. 2 years after Margaret's imprisonment, our family gatherings had a completely different dynamic. Instead of Margaret controlling conversations and decisions, family members shared responsibility for planning events and managing family business. Instead of artificial competition for Margaret's approval, relatives supported each other through genuine care and mutual respect. "We are learning to be a family based on choice rather than obligation," Emma observed during a recent holiday gathering. Margaret taught us that family meant accepting control and manipulation. We are discovering that family can mean supporting each other's independence and growth. My relationship with David continued to heal through therapy and consistent accountability. He never fully forgave himself for choosing Margaret over me during the crisis, but his genuine remorse and committed change helped rebuild trust gradually. Our marriage survived Margaret's manipulation, but it was fundamentally different, stronger in some ways, more cautious in others. The most profound lesson from this experience was understanding that family loyalty must be based on truth rather than blind faith. Margaret had weaponized our desire to maintain family unity, using our commitment to blood relations to enable her criminal behavior. True family protection required courage to confront harmful behavior rather than perpetuating it through silence. I often think about the person I was before discovering Margaret's crimes, naive about family manipulation, trusting in systems that prioritized appearances over substance, willing to sacrifice my own needs to maintain peace. That person would not have survived what Margaret put our family through. The experience forced me to develop strength I did not know I possessed and wisdom I wish I had never needed. Hope is now a happy, healthy toddler who will grow up in a family that values honesty over harmony, truth over tradition. She will know her grandmother's story not as family shame, but as a cautionary tale about the importance of maintaining integrity even when it costs relationships. She will learn that protecting people you love sometimes requires confronting their harmful behavior rather than enabling it. Margaret remains in federal prison with 6 years remaining on her sentence. She has never expressed genuine remorse for her crimes, continuing to maintain that her theft was motivated by family protection rather than personal greed. Some family members still occasionally express sympathy for her situation, but most have accepted that her punishment was appropriate for her crimes. The prenup that started this entire battle was ultimately dissolved by mutual agreement between David and me. We established new financial arrangements based on transparency and shared decision-making rather than protective clauses designed to prevent manipulation. Trust, we learned, cannot be created through legal documents. It must be built through consistent actions and mutual respect. As I finish telling this story, I want to ask all of you watching, have you ever experienced family members using love and loyalty to manipulate your decisions? Have you witnessed financial abuse disguised as family protection? When family members cross boundaries, how do you balance maintaining relationships with protecting yourself and your children? Share your experiences in the comments below, because family manipulation thrives in silence, and your stories might help someone recognize warning signs in their own relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to support more content about recognizing and overcoming family manipulation. Share this video with friends who might benefit from understanding how financial abuse operates within families, because awareness is the first step toward prevention. Thank you for watching my family's journey from manipulation to truth, from control to freedom. I hope our experience helps you recognize that standing up for justice, even against family members you love, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Remember that family should lift you up, not tear you down, and that real protection comes from honesty, not from hiding uncomfortable truths. May you find the courage to seek truth in your own relationships and the strength to build family connections based on mutual respect rather than fear and manipulation.